Hello and welcome to episode 48 of the TRUUMAN Podcast, the podcast designed to create a generation of self-defined men. Today, I'm joined by Alex Holmes, the founder of the Time to Talk project and the presenter of the Time to Talk podcast. Alex, thank you so much for being with me today. How are you doing?
I'm good, thanks. Thank you for having me. It's a very rare, weird, warm day, but
yes, not too bad for the time of year.
No, it's not.
So, as always, we'll start with the trickiest question. Alex, in your own words, what makes you a man?
What makes me a man? I think the thing that makes me a man would be a question that I always asked when I was working as a school counsellor was, not asked, but worked with, was looking at our character and being able to work on that. So I would say that I embody the characteristics of somebody who has integrity, who's self-determined, who has respect for others, is affirmed in himself, but also collaborative. I would say that those are the things that make me a man. But I'm compassionate, I'm empathetic, I'm a good friend, I'm a good son. You know, I think that those are pretty much the founding, pillars of what it means to be a man, just being a decent person. Not being perfect, but also recognizing that there are going to be, that you're not the worst human being out there. So that's pretty much me. That's what makes me a man, other than, just the way that I've been socialized. But that's pretty much it.
Other than the obvious. Yeah. Why don't you tell us a little bit about the Time to Talk project? What is it? What does it mean?
Okay, yeah. So the Time to Talk project is my mental health consultancy that has been around I have been around in theory since 2021, but has been fully established since this year in 2024. But it's a mental health consultancy that focuses on the improvement of mental health for men, that's young men and adult men, by way of, mental health skills, practicing, consultancy with organizations and educational establishments, coaching, and just creating spaces for men to develop themselves emotionally and relationally.
All the good stuff then. When someone gets into this space, I always find there's a little bit of a story. So what's the backstory to Alex? How did he end up coming into this space?
Well, it's a very it's a varied story. So I'm trying to think if I can refine parts of it. But I came back to the UK in 2015 after teaching abroad for a year after graduating. And I found very quickly that London being London, and having moved back from a country that was very slow, I was on an island called Reunion, that's in the Indian Ocean. Moving back to London and being back in this rat race and slotting back into society in the way that you left it. So I ended up moving back home, and I'm the eldest. So I ended up slotting back into that position. At home, I began to realize that the friends that I had left in London when I was 18, before I went to university and came back, they weren't there, and they weren't in the same places mentally as I was. I traveled quite a bit. I had been out of the city, and I came back and I realized very quickly that I was quite lonely. And there was no one to really connect with, in a sense. I went into journalism after graduating. I think when I was abroad, I was looking at things to do. I wanted to write for a living, and I wanted to have a radio show. Coincidentally, I arrived at doing both of those things through the podcast and writing a book, but I'll get to that. But I got to London, I got to the UK, and I went straight into this rat race, being a journalist, working in big newspapers. And pressure of being in those spaces was very, very overwhelming. And looking back on it now, I think if I had gone into those areas and those spaces as the person I am now, I probably would have been able to stomach it for quite a bit of time. But the way that I was at that time, I was very unsure of myself, didn't have much confidence in both myself, others, and the world. I was very much just kind of floating. I was doing things that I just for the sake of doing them. I didn't even have reasons for anything. I presented as if I had my head screwed on, and to an extent I did, but I just wasn't sure about a lot of things. So I was in this space, this 200-year-old newspaper, very aware that I was the only Black man in this space, experiencing challenges that I felt were very specific to my demographic, but others would kind of think otherwise to that. So I was being paid less. I was being overworked. I was having my work checked and scrutinized. I was, it felt like I was being victimized in a lot of different ways. And that put a lot of pressure on me because I felt like I had to be the best version of myself all the time. I had to be perfect in this space. And, I took myself very seriously, and it wasn't helpful. It wasn't useful, in any way. And, I was doing that, but I was also trying to do quite a few side projects at the same time to kind of give myself a bit of freedom. So I started a books podcast, and that was kind of growing quite quickly and quite rapidly at the time. So a lot of I didn't really have much balance in my life. So I had Monday to Friday, I was working at this at this newspaper. Some Saturdays I was working. But I was working those weeks, and then I was kind of running to do this podcast, and then the podcast was growing, and then I was working, and it was really intense. And I just found myself just getting overworked and burning out. That plus the fact that I was trying to make friendships, I was trying to live and have an adult life where I was being social and whatnot. And I just couldn't manage it all. I was it felt like I was trying to run with the big boys. And I just thought, because I had loads of friends who were like bankers and lawyers, and they were getting paid like 3 times what I was getting paid. So the things that they were doing, I was like, oh, I want to go and do that too. But it's going to cost me quite a bit to do that. You guys don't have the same kind of thoughts that I do, or the things that I've got to think about. And even though my like outgoings weren't as high, it was still not high enough to reach some of the things that these guys were doing. So there was a lot of pressure. I just felt that just from loads of different places, and I was putting a lot of pressure on myself. And I ended up having 3 breakdowns at work. Work was a big part of my stress. I was consistently told, like I said, I was being paid less, considerably less than my counterparts who looked different from me. I was consistently being told that I wasn't doing well enough, and I wasn't, quote unquote, quite there yet. I was singled out often, and it just wasn't a helpful experience. So the breakdowns happened. I took some time off, realized that that's not what I wanted to do, and then slowly found myself phasing out of being in the newspapers. And then I went to different ones, and I think the industry is just the industry. It was the same kind of feeling. And then, then the pandemic happened, and it was kind of like a few months before the pandemic kind of really kicked in that March 2020 time. I was freelancing anyway, because I had made my my grand exit, and I was like, I'm going to go and podcast full time. I'm going to freelance. I'm going to do this. I want to do everything that you guys said I couldn't do. So the pandemic came, and it was like, okay, so everybody shut down. So now I'm at home, and that's when I began to lean into the mental health work a lot more. The podcast, I had set up another podcast, which was the precursor, or pretty much the same podcast as Time to Talk at the minute, where I was talking to a lot of people about burnout and working cultures and those things. I began having loads of conversations, running men's groups online, writing pieces about mental health, And then I started writing my book, Time to Talk: How Men Think About Love, Belonging, and Connection. I wrote that all through 2020, and that came out in 2021. In that time, I trained as a coach, as a health coach, then went on to train as a hypnotherapist, and now I'm currently continuing my training to become a psychotherapist or go down the psychotherapeutic route. And that's how Time to Talk was pretty much born, essentially. There are other interesting avenues and stuff, but I don't want to take up too much of the time talking about that. But yeah, that's kind of how I ended up here.
Well, thank you for sharing. It's always great to hear someone else's story. That's the whole purpose of the podcast. So I'm sure we'll get into some more details in a second anyway.
Yeah.
One thing that you really touched on, which I found really interesting, and obviously now, is this desire for men to have it all. We live in a society now where there's a lot going on and there's a lot of things, and that there is that external pressure. Do you see that as a common issue for men, in the sense of just wanting to have everything, being the best at everything?
Yeah, I think I write about this quite a bit in my book. And I write it from the perspective of a journalist. I haven't written anything published in a physical book from the perspective of a therapist at the minute, which I'm working on. But but I did have a lot of conversations with people around success, what success means, what it means to fail, and how that then impacts our mental and emotional well-being as men, how it affects our purpose. I don't think there's anything wrong with wanting to have it all. I think we are abundant people. I think that we have untapped potential. We've got such huge, varied amounts of skills. I think it's the pressure we put on ourselves to be successful. I think that is one of the questions that I was having, because there is going to be a moment where we are prioritizing different things at different times. And if I was confident in myself when I was a journalist at that time, I probably would have been okay, because I'd been like, all right, so I'm going to proceed with this, even though it's kind of causing me a bit of aggro, but I'm going to proceed. And then I can kind of like make my exit and do other things elsewhere. But I think that one of the things is that a lot of men, we don't prioritize our relationships a lot of the time. We prioritize our work, because, we are very focused socially to focus on our ability to provide and make money, and to be, financially viable, and for our own sense of self. But also when we are looking to, date, or when we are looking to, start a family or be in a relationship with whomever that looks like, you are trying to make sure that you have an economically viable state of being. Now, that does create pressure. Because you want to be in work and you want to advance in it. And sometimes, for a lot of men, we will put a lot of things on the line so that we can work longer, work later, work harder, so that then we can get the results. But I think that when it comes to the way that the workplace is set up, it's set up in this hyper competitive way where we don't have the balance of being able to excel at work and also be able to have a fully functioning work life. Personal and private life. There was an example. Somebody said that they were doing really well at work. This guy, he just had a baby, doing really well at work, and he was just kind of writing up emails, getting all this different stuff. And he was on track to getting promoted. And his, I think, 2 managers above him kind of messaged and was like, there's a deadline for this thing. I know it's last minute. And so this guy's like trying to leave and get out of the door just because he's done with the day. I know this is last minute, but there's a deadline for this. Would you be able to stay and get this done? Much appreciated, etc. So this guy was faced with a decision. He was like, should I leave and go home to my new wife, who has just had a baby, and I want to spend time. And she's already messaged to say, pick up the stuff on the way home. She's not being able to get anything. She really would like her husband to be with after work, versus answering and doing the work that your boss requires you, because you know that you're on track to kind of being promoted and getting more money. And then there was this dilemma that he had to do, and he had to pick, and he picked his wife. And because he picked his wife, that over time, he found that he wasn't put forward for promotions, and he wasn't, given promoted in salary at all. And making the correlation, having conversations going forward, realized that it was because he had chosen to go to see his wife and child before doing the work deadline. So I think that there are structures and there are cultural things that have shown that men are expected to put things on the line and sacrifice things in order for them to be successful. And I think that when we kind of reframe what success looks like, we can then begin to measure ourselves quite differently. Now, I personally think that having a successful relationship, being a present father, being a present partner, is far greater than being the general manager of X, Y, and Z. The family for me will always come before the work at any given point. Yeah. I don't know. What do you think?
It's interesting that there's that traditional element that's still there, right? Of like, I need to be a provider and I need to do this. Let's take London for an example. It's almost impossible to be a sole provider and live in that traditional way of being without being in the 1% of earners and actually achieving that. To do that now is essentially economically really impossible. It's not a viable role anymore. Yet we still have that pressure on ourselves. And I guess it's going to be a time thing where we have these conversations that you and I are having right now, and that will start to untwine what's been done. And maybe those conversations will start to happen through work. But the flip side of that is there'll always be a single man or a single woman that's willing to put in the hours and get ahead. And there is that element of career and that competition and that side of things. But you're right. It's reframing success for you in that time frame and what that looks like. Like, if you have a young family, if you have a job, is everything ticked on that side, or do you need to push forward to go and get that promotion? Or can you essentially enjoy what you've reaped, which is the family, and try and nurture that as well? It almost becomes a balancing act, right? Of like, what's the right thing? What's the right lever to pull at this time? And what's the wrong lever to pull? And that's what I think adds to that pressure a little bit as well. For me personally, is there a way that you have reframed success? Because when you talk about you mentioned that perfectionism was something that you really focused on. But when I asked you what makes you a man, you said to know that I'm not perfect.
Yeah, good catch. I reframed. I had to completely reframe success, and I think that I have to practice what I preach at any given point. I would never go into something and be like, do, or kind of profess to do anything, write anything that I haven't tested on myself at any given point and worked with others on. And I think that perfection is a big thing that a particular archetype of person focuses on. But I do think that there is this idea of being a perfect man that makes us struggle. Like, if we're not going to the gym every day, if we're not eating well every day, if we don't look the best every day, if we don't, these things, there are some standards that we can slip on as men, because these are all standards that we create for ourselves. But I just found it very interesting that I was thinking this way about being successful. And so for me, I had to reframe it and think to myself, well, what gives me purpose? What actually makes me want to get up in the morning and go to the gym and speak to my mum and dad and speak to my friends and my cousins and my siblings and do the work I do. What makes me get up every morning and say, I'm training to be in this profession, and I'm building out these programs, and I'm talking to people on podcasts, and I'm doing workshops. What is driving me to do that? And what then would success look like via that? And I think when we spend a bit more time discussing and figuring out those things for ourselves and as individuals, we can then come to a conclusion or be in the process of ever finding that out, because I think it just gives us a different scope on life, a different way of relating to the world, and a different way of relating to work. And obviously, if you feel that, this is your passion to be in a particular career, in a particular thing, I think it's always good to think about why. Why does that? And I think that when we attach that why to very material things, it doesn't really get us very far a lot of the time. But thinking about the things that really will see us through to the end, like our relationships and who we are as a person, which is like what I said at the beginning when I was talking about characteristics, rather than what I do or earn or gain. I think those are the things that are important. So me redefining what success means to me was just thinking about what was important to me, and it took me a long time to even get onto that track myself. So yeah, and I think that's the important part.
I think why is a really, really tough question. I have been doing this for about 2 years now, and I still don't fully have a grasp on the why. I have an overarching view of where I want to go and what I want to do, but still trying to grab hold of that why
that's interesting.
Is tough. Yeah, it is interesting, and the reason that I bring it up is because you obviously talked about your breakdowns, and I also went through suicidal thoughts and these sort of things. These are essentially rock bottoms for us both and for men, and that seems to be the catalyst for these conversations. But what I am exploring now, and what I would love to get your thoughts on, is how do men start to have that conversation about why and purpose now, before it gets too late or before they go into a meltdown? How do you start to have those conversations?
With who is the question?
Well, yeah, exactly.
How do I so I think the two things. So you say you've been doing this for 2 years.
Yeah.
I've been podcasting for almost 10 years now. And I took 2 years off doing my podcast because I was just doing it. There was no overarching reason. I didn't think about what I was doing and why I was doing it. I just thought, I have to do this because I am that. And when I took the 2 years off, it was a hard learning curve just to be like, oh, this is a bit, what do I do now? What can I do? And then finding that love again for doing it, and actually the reasons for having these conversations is so important. How do we have the conversations about purpose? Yes, I mean, I don't want to be too kind of esoterical or anything, but aren't we always having conversations about purpose sort of thing, we have to ask that question, why? In my profession, I am always asking clients as to, a lot of clients come in and want to know why. And I'm just always exploring the question of, okay, so what does that why look like for you? Because I can't tell you what your why is. You know that inherently. And I do feel that as people, we have all the answers ourselves. We have the answers internally, like what's going on. And obviously, depending on your spiritual makeup, you don't have that, you explore that spiritually to think to yourself that, that is these things are, ordained for you, and created out for you. But our inherent, intuition and feeling is that spiritual compass as well. So we know internally why we do stuff, and we know what we want to do, but do we actually go out and try and actualize those things? Not always. And then the question is, why is that then? And it usually boils down to a few things. And one of the main things is fear. So trying to understand what that looks like. And I was scared for a long time. Scared to lose my job, because then if I lost my job, I wouldn't have any money. If I didn't have any money, I couldn't do things and I'd be destitute. That was the part. If I didn't have any money, I'm not a man. If I didn't have any money, I've failed. Stopping you from doing the stuff that you want to do is only going to make you be living a half life. And that's not fun for anybody.
No, it's not. Do you think all men are considering their purpose and asking why? Do you genuinely believe that?
I believe that men are asking themselves a lot of questions generally. I think that's been clear for years. I just think that the conclusions we come to aren't always what they need to be. So we're asking ourselves questions now a lot more about what it means to be a man. That was your opening question. What does being a man mean to you or look like to you? And we're asking those questions a lot more now, because we're trying to figure out whether what we've been taught versus what we feel matches up. We're being presented with a version of masculinity that we don't always feel is congruent to us. To the wide majority of men, we also feel that there are things happening in the world which are there to kind of deconstruct who we are. And because we just exist in a world where we are kind of told, just, you're a boy, do this. You're a teenage boy, do this. You're a young man, do this. You're a man, do this. You're an old man, you can't do that. Like, there are just so many different things that we just restrict ourselves with as we age, within reason, because there are some things that without boundaries or adequate legislation, people start to do strange things. But as you navigate the world and as you kind of pursue certain things, you're trying to understand who you are as you go. And I think for time immemorial, we've been really exploring this idea of who we are. And men have for generations asked that same question: who am I, and what does this mean for me? And I think it is a huge part of the male journey to kind of figure that out. But I just think that nowadays, I think we're trying to come to the answer very quickly, and we want to be this. And again, it feeds back into that kind of perfection thing, that immediacy, that just wanting to be the ideal man, when we really could just take it easy and recognize that this is a journey. And if you're familiar with the hero's journey, it's not the easiest path at any given point, but we all go through it in a particular way.
Yeah, it's a nice way of putting it, because you always hear questions like, what would you say to your 18-year-old self, or what would you say to a 14-year-old you? And my logical response to that is, it doesn't really matter, because he wouldn't have listened anyway. And it's a case of this journey of life is important, and it is where most of the lessons sort of unfold. And the whole point of life is to live it, right? It's not to sit in silence. But I do feel a lot of men do sit in silence, or as you put it, live in fear of the other side of that voice. Is there anything that you can think of, or anything that you can suggest for maybe some men that are in that situation to sort of make that first step?
First step to
coming, you essentially took what you felt was the norm, right? Which was to get a good job, work hard at it, get all the way up to the top, and that would have been success. But during that and unraveling of that, the questions that you were asking yourself was, is this what I want to do? Is this the right place for me? And then you answered those questions by moving and doing other things. Whereas there's probably a peer that you worked with that's probably sat on the desk opposite where you sat, who has the same thoughts as you, but is still sat there.
Yeah. It's so funny, because I did have a colleague, and one day he just didn't come back into work. He just wasn't brought back in, because he on a night out, I think it was a Christmas do or something that we had, or a party, or when I was on the entertainment desk for a while for an entertainment party, he got himself caught up in quite the scandal. Let's just put it that way. One thing I did notice about him was that he didn't spend much time being introspective. He was very, very, very externally focused. Thinking about that now, everything he did was for approval of another. And I think that for young men in particular, I do think that there is a conversation to be had about who is being a role model to them and what being a role model means in this particular context. Like, if you have a positive masculine role model who can actually help you find your gifts, find the strengths internally, find the things that can help you move from one position to the next, and give you the resources and the strength to kind of go on, and the courage and the confidence to do the things that you want to do, those are the important people that we need in our lives. So I'd say probably the first thing that any young man could do is find a mentor, find a coach, and get into therapy to begin that work of being able to speak about what's going on, being able to rework the beliefs that we hold about ourselves, reestablish our values, and then kind of looking at our peer groups and understanding who's around us. What kind of friends do we have? What kind of people are inspiring us at the moment? And once you figure out what your values are, and then you look at your environment and your peers and the people around you, you can then make an assessment as to whether these are the friends for you, whether these are the people for you, because of the way that you set up your values and the way that you value your life and the world as it seems and as it looks. And I don't think a lot of young boys are kind of held in that way. Because I work in schools quite often, I find that they get to year 11 and then they're kind of like left to their own devices in year 12 and 13. If you're an international listener, that's, the last couple of years of school before you go to university. And that is an interesting bit, because if you're just left to your own devices from between 16 and 19, say, you're probably going to put yourself back into a particular state of mind, and you're not going to have anybody holding you or helping you kind of move forward into the next bit. And what I found is that we don't have that many mentors, that many coaches, that many leaders in those spaces to kind of help us transition into quote unquote manhood, adulthood in an accurate way. When it comes to men and boys, there isn't a concrete rite of passage that we have in the West. There isn't one. I think that certain cultures have them, and certain cultures have created them recently, certain things, but there isn't that much of a rite of passage. There isn't that kind of process of developing the characteristics that kind of help you grow into becoming a man and to being a man as it stands. So that is, for me, I think that if you're a young man, I feel like go and search out for those mentors, search out for those coaches. If you're an adult man, you can still have a coach and you can still look for a mentor, but just take the time to figure out and ask yourself the questions. Who am I? Do I want this? Why am I doing this? Those are the things that I would say look for in yourself, and just spend time on that. You don't have to come to an answer straight away. You don't have to come to a solution straight away. But I would say slow down, because anything that moves too quickly and with you not being ready is not going to end up in the right result anyway.
Yeah, that's a nice way of finishing that. Is you don't like knee-jerk reactions, I guess. Like, a lot of these conversations that I have usually end with people going on a new career path, because that's the obvious one. And I'm always cautious with this podcast to say, don't just quit your job. Like, have some thought around what's next, and don't just jump in.
Like, well, yeah,
It's
why?
really,
Why quit your job? Like, okay, so you're going to quit your job. That's fine. No one's saying that you shouldn't do that. But what is it that you want to do? If you're going to do it in the pursuit of something else, then spend some time thinking about that.
Yeah, have that lined up. Yeah, I like that. Yeah, it's good. That 16 to 19 is really interesting, because it is almost your formative years. I've said in a number of podcasts, I don't feel like I turned into a man until I was 30.
Okay.
which is like a very prolonged rite of passage. And it's not about sending a bunch of 16-year-olds into the woods and making them come back with a wolf or whatever it used to be
Yeah.
or is in other cultures. But yeah,
But
there is something missing.
What changed for you?
It was all around the breakdown, and all around those thoughts that were going. And I guess those questions were always there. I always felt I was for a higher purpose, as I think a lot of men have that thought process. But I was able to actually start questioning it and what it looked like, and redefine success. Essentially, was where it sort of changed. I had just gone into autopilot, similar to yourself, and just gone through the motions of what success looked like, and it was very material and very financial driven, which works for some people. But yeah, when it's gone, it's gone.
Yeah. See, most people define becoming a man when they become a father. Most people define becoming a man when they get married or find the partner, their life partner, make that commitment to them, right? I just find that very fascinating. Yeah, that there has to be the significant life change in order for you to change. And but that's the way it works, right?
Yeah, I think so. I think that's more of a definition of a man, right? Anyone can be old.
Yeah.
Like it's you touched on it at the beginning of like what you said. It's about being committed and having open conversations and nurturing relationships. I think that's exactly. These are cornerstones to it, rather than just turning 18 legally. You're a man, but are you?
It just means you'll be tried. It means you'll be tried in an adult court.
Yeah,
should anything happen,
Yeah, I think the true testament to that statement, and that a lot of it's interesting that you say these things about men when they say they became a man, is that there's the old saying, isn't it? Boys don't grow up; their toys just become more expensive.
Okay.
And I think that sort of confirms it for me. That if that's your goal is like the nice car and X, Y, and Z, you're still in that boy mode.
That's a very interesting point to you. And if you don't mind me asking questions at this point, if that's all right.
That's fine.
So I was, yesterday I was walking down in central London. I was going to a meeting, and it is no surprise to anybody who knows me that I am a Potterhead. Yeah, I love the Wizarding World and Harry Potter. Listen to podcasts. I know which house I am. All these different things, right? I just have that is just a part of me that brings out the childlike aspect in me. I lose my mind completely. I'm brought back to being 11, 10, reading the books for the first time, watching the films for the first time. When I see men embarking on their hobbies or embarking on things that are, say, nerdy, so Lego, Star Wars, Lord of the Rings, Harry Potter, etc., or football, any kind of sport, etc., all of these things, when I see them kind of nerding out, I get a bit I get curious as to think what is acceptable and what is not. We accept men acting childish and kind of loud when it comes to sport, but should they be interested in probably the more nerdy things, pretty much innocuous stuff, like, things that are just probably just a bit, they're, a bit more introverted things just to themselves and stuff. They're seen as, remaining a boy and whatnot. But then there's this whole thing of, well, when you get older, you start to buy cars and you want to keep buying cars and doing all these different things. And I just find it just very interesting, and be keen to understand what your perspective on that is. Just to think about, like, what keeps you in the boy state, what brings you back to the boy state outside of being the man.
Yeah, do you know what I think it is? I think it's that dream of I could have been. I imagine you're still waiting for your letter to come through the post box to let them know that you're going to Hogwarts. The same way
on its way. I'm convinced.
Yeah,
I'm
of
convinced they
course.
just made them. I think I was convinced there was an admin error somewhere in Edinburgh. You know.
Yeah, yeah, it must have been. It's an hour was off that day,
Exactly. They were on
and
strike because they're overworked, underpaid.
I think it's the same for Dave in the pub who supports his football team. There's
Mm,
still a little bit of him when he puts that shirt on that thinks, I could do this. If they called me up, I could get on that pitch and I
yeah.
could do it.
Mm,
And the same with cars. I think it's just that dream of what could have been. And I think that sort of goes back to that fear point that you were making, which is a lot of men think about their why and think about what they want to do, but fear gets in the way. So maybe that's the perfect outlet for what would have been the perfect life. And
mm,
probably not the most realistic one, let's be honest, because only a small proportion of people make it in sport and in these sort of things. But when you look at, as you called them, the nerdier side of things, again, it's just an outlet that you probably, when you were younger, you had a vision of that being your dream, and
yeah.
it's almost the perfect life.
Yeah. Yeah. So your toys get more expensive. You
Yeah,
get them. You get the money. You want to spend it, and you want to look a particular way. You know. I personally would
yeah,
spend it on traveling, but people want to buy
yeah.
cars and boats and do all things.
Well, that goes back to that point, right? Which is, I think there are a lot of men living in uh, sort of boy states, and there are men that have had deep conversations with themselves that maybe the trivia and those sort of things they've allowed to let go because they're now
Mm,
living a life that they want to live and
yeah.
they want to enjoy. At the end of the day, all those things are escapisms, right?
Yeah.
So it's only a way of escaping from reality, and you may do it less and less as you create a reality that you want to live in or that
Yeah.
you enjoy being part of. That's my view on it, but I'm not too.
Okay. No, it's interesting. Yeah, it's interesting. Very interesting.
So
Boys and their toys.
those are their toys. Hey, that's the bottom line.
Yeah.
What are you hopeful for next in the men's space? What are you
Hmm.
seeing well? What do you want to see more of?
So, what I'm seeing going well is more and more conversations are being had, like this one. Um, more and more men are gathering together, showing affection to one another, understanding that we're all humans in this thing. You know, we're just trying our best. What I want to see more cohesion within the gender, and by that I mean like I want there to be a situation where if you're in a room full of men, it's a room full of men. And that could be men who are of different races, of different classes, of different sexualities, different gender expressions. They're men in the room. Yeah. And that's always been something that I've been really really want to see in the world, where when we're working together and we're talking about this conversation around masculinity, and we're talking about this conversation around manhood and what it means to be a man and all of these different things, I would love there to be a conversation whereby different men can come into a room thinking one way and leaving thinking another and feeling another, and actually leaving with somebody as their brother and that's their friend. I just haven't, and I don't like the divisive nature of masculinity, of men, of trying to kind of of one-upmanship and challenge and doing all these different things. And I think that if we do challenge, we've got to challenge with love. We've got to challenge with care. We've got to be able to say, look, I love and care about you, so I'm going to tell you this from a place of I want you to do better or feel better about yourself, etc. You know, rather than it being a kind of I must win the conversation sort of thing. I think that's what we could do better with. We could do better with forming our relationships and making our relationships stronger with one another. It shouldn't be like this. I think I had a conversation on I got a conversation on my podcast coming out soon, and one of my guests said that, you know, he posited the theory that homophobia and transphobia is rooted in misogyny itself and that great fear of femininity and what it means for manhood. And this whole idea of femininity is something to be frightened of, something to be pushed away, something to be left over there and not over here, right? And that made me think a lot about it. It's something that I inherently knew, but I thought actually that's actually interesting for it to be articulated that way. And if somebody who looks different to you, has had a different life experience to you, who sees sexuality and gender differently to you, is sitting in front of you, I want to be able to sit with people and help them understand what that means for them. And I think that's where the masculinity conversation goes. I think anything that needs to change in society, once the men get on board, everything changes. Once the men get on board, everything changes. And I just don't think we're getting on board with a lot of things. So it's like we're in this kind of fractional thing. Women will always make things change. They will always push for change. The whole nature of womanhood is change. And I think that men need to kind of look inward and think to themselves about what that change looks like for us as well, because we're all about direction. So yeah, once men integrate their femininity into their life and into their world and really look at it, change in direction will transform a whole load of different things.
That's an interesting thought. That's given me a lot to think about as well. I genuinely could speak to you for hours, Alex. I think this has been a really interesting deep dive and quite a thought-provoking podcast, probably one of the deeper ones I've done. But so thank you very much for being on the podcast. I genuinely appreciate your time. I will leave the final thoughts with you. You can let people know where to find you, what you've got going on, and yeah, over to you.
Yeah. So you can find me on my podcast, Time to Talk. That comes out every Thursday. I also have a newsletter, the Time to Talk newsletter. It's timetotalk.substack.com. So there you can listen to the podcast as well, but there'll be extra writings that are going to come up there soon as well. Catch me on LinkedIn. Yeah, that's pretty much where you're really going to find me often, speaking about something, talking about something. But check out my website, alexholmes.co. There's going to be quite a few exciting things coming in the new year with regards to men's groups. And if you have any interest in any, coaching or therapy, it's all there. So yeah, go and have a look. And also buy my book.